Thanks to Spider Farmer for sponsoring this video. Spider Farmer is running a 420 sale on all of their products, and a bigger sale on their SE series LED grow lights. The SE3000, SE5000, SE7000, and SE1000W are all on sale. On top of their discount, you can stack my coupon code to save even more. So for any of their SE series grow lights, use coupon code MrGrow at 8 to save 8% more, and for all other Spider Farmer products, use coupon code MrGrow at 5 to save 5% more. These coupon codes work on both their website and Amazon. Links are in the description section below, and the sale ends on April 24th. Have you tried the Peanut Butter Breath cultivar? If so, how did you like it? Yes, I did. I actually really like Peanut Butter Breath. So I was gifted from THC Titan from Square One Genetics. He actually started his line. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but he actually started his line with Peanut Butter Breath cut. I believe it was a cut he started with. He ended up making it into an F2. And then he took that F2 and started his line, I believe. I need to get him on the podcast sometime and go through his story there. But I got his F2s that he created of Peanut Butter Breath. They were awesome. I ended up getting one that changed color to purple. This is on my channel. If you dig back, you can see beautiful plant, real dense all the way down to the bottom. I love a cultivar that there's that density down even in the lower part of the canopy, right? So you might not do all the lollipopping that you should have done, but those lower buds are still really dense. Not all cultivars do that. I know there's select cultivars that do. And then as far as the smoke, it was a very chill, narcotic effect, which is something I really like. So I highly recommend Peanut Butter Breath. I really did enjoy that cultivar. What's your thought on using molasses during flower? Do it. Yeah, there's nothing against it. I mean, feeding the microbes, right? My thoughts on using molasses as far as frequency, I personally like to just use it only in flower. I've used it throughout the grow. Used it, every other week, used it once a month, used it every week. Just generally speaking, like my own observations, it seems like if I start the plant on molasses young, the plant looks great, after the feeding. The plant's praying up towards the light, beautiful, clearly healthy, clearly happy. But eventually that kind of goes away, I feel like, if you use it too early in veg. So that's why I personally like to use it in flower mostly, even all the way up through that flush period and all the way to harvest. Plant seemed stuck in time, was growing good, then the leaves got darker and the leaves grew smaller than before. What could it be? It could be so many different things. I mean, there's so many different variables on it, right? Nutrition. If you're using synthetic nutrients, one of the first things I ask folks that are asking for help is, what is the pH and ppm? Oftentimes folks will do a runoff test. So they'll run water through the medium, collect the runoff water, and then put their pH probe in there or their TDS tester to get a ppm measurement. And then that can tell you quite a bit. Sometimes it might be that the pH is out of range and you're not getting the proper nutrient uptake. That could be stunting it. You could have overwatered. There might not be lacks of oxygen in the root zone. That could stunt growth. Not enough light. That could slow growth. So there are many different things that it could potentially be. If I had more information on kind of what you're using for, nutrients, lighting, light distance, pH, ppm, runoff measurements, I might be able to give you a better answer there. First autos, when would you say top dress? In Happy Frog with worm casting rice hulls on top. I don't know what you're using. I'm going to assume you're using some type of blend at this point. Worm castings, rice hull. There's got to be something more than just worm castings. I'm assuming, at least there should be. I would recommend that there's some type of blend. Typically what they'll do is, a lot of folks will have their initial blend of the medium with the nutrients. Then about 30 days into the grow, depending on the plant size, depending on the size of the container, so on and so forth, there's a lot of variables. But generally speaking, about day 30 or day 40, they'll top dress again. Some people go as early as day 20, top dress again, then flip to flower, and then 30 days into flower, they will do another top dressing. And then depending on if you've got, if you're growing an 8-week, 9-week, 10-week cultivar, or one of the cultivars that are longer than that, you might want to do another top dressing. So pretty much, generally speaking, every 30 days, roughly. Some people do every 20 days. Some people do every 40 days, depending on what blend you're using, so on and so forth. But roughly every 30 days is when a top dressing should happen. What would be the lowest wattage to grow? You can get away with less than that. There's 100 watts is what a lot of people are getting away with. A lot of these grow lights that are for a 2 foot by 2 foot grow space, they're just putting 100 watts of LED over that. And they're able to get away with that. I'm not really sure what size grow space you're in. If you're in a larger grow space, then more watts are warranted there. Roughly 400 to 500 watts of LED in a 4x4 space. Those are just some rough numbers there. How long before you start feeding with Fox Farms? So Fox Farm Trio, I'm assuming you're talking about there. Check out their feeding chart. If you started with an amended soil, typically you can get it roughly 20, 30, sometimes 40 days out of that amended soil, depending on what size grow pot it's in. And then at that point, you would start feedings. And usually what I'll do is I'll check the runoff measurement, ppm. Some people go after EC. They'll track that instead. Yeah, check out their feeding chart. I would say go by the ratios, because they formulate their nutrients with a particular balance in place. If you have an imbalance of nutrients in your medium, more of one nutrient and not enough of another, it could cause a lockout to happen. You can see deficiencies. So it's very, very common. So yeah, check out their feeding chart around 30, 40 days. That's probably when you'll do your first feeding. Do you have an update on the AC Infinity pole fan? How do you like it? They're still not available. No issues so far. I'm running 4 of them right now. So I run 2 in each one of my tents. I have a 2x4 and a 4x4. They're working fine. I think the main issue with those oscillating fans that clip onto the grow tents from other brands is the fact that they had their wiring run through the actual case, or through the actual piece that connects to the grow tent. So as the fan was oscillating, the wire was just rubbing up against the side and it was shortening it out. So that's why you hear about people who, like, their tents have gotten on fire and stuff like that. It's because of the design. Now AC Infinity, their fans that clip to the grow tent, those ones are actually the wire's like off to the side, so it doesn't even go through the actual casing or whatever. So yeah, it's still working great. I like it a lot. And there was several people who complained about the light on the back. That light actually turns off. So that's just on temporarily, and then it ends up turning off after 5 or 8 seconds or something like that, I think. Why do some growers claim Fox Farm Ocean Forest burns seedlings? I've never experienced that. Have you? I mean, I get minor burns sometimes, some cultivars, but it's not really detrimental to the grow. I've had one plant that I can remember that was detrimental, to where it just looked like nitrogen toxicity and the leaves were just terrible. I think I have it on my channel, my main channel somewhere. If you guys go back to the sour diesel, this had to have been like 3 years ago, roughly. That's really the only one. The pheno just couldn't take it. I mean, sour diesel, from my experience and from what I hear from a lot of people, is that it's a very sensitive pheno when it comes to feeding. So finicky. You're going to get some genetics just like that. But now I use Fox Farm Ocean Forest soil. I've been using it for over 10 years, and I like it. What's your thoughts on way to make edibles? I usually do the oil or the butter, mostly oil. Done in a crock pot, kind of letting it soak in the crock pot. I don't have the recipe memorized or anything like that, but yeah, I usually do oil and then use that within the edibles. I think in one of your talks with Dr. Bugbee, you discuss using green light during the later phase of flowering should increase trichome production. Could you refresh my memory on the specifics? So it's not green light. Green light is something that's used, but you usually hear of UVB as the one that increases trichomes. Now, what Dr. Bugbee had said is that there are some studies around it, but it was, and I don't remember the exact word, but something like inconclusive, meaning that they couldn't say for sure that it did increase trichomes. Now, somebody else had replied in the comments and said that there's some other study out there, but he didn't post a link. So I'm not really sure if there is actually another study, or is somebody just saying that. Have you grown hydroponics? If so, what's your thoughts? Not yet. DWC, not yet. My concern, and I have a Garden Talk podcast episode with somebody who does DWC and our DWC. My concern was that I live in too hot of a climate. Water temperature needs to be controlled and needs to be under, don't quote me on this, I think under like 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and my natural just regular temperature can be 75 to 80. So I just have a feeling that I'm going to struggle when it comes to water temp. Now I know I can get a chiller. My concern is that's more energy, and me just being a small home grower, it just doesn't seem like it's worth it. But I do want to try it in the wintertime one of these times. Any good tips for, welcome to the Grow Tent, PFG, Purple Frost Giant? It's somewhat of a heavy feeder in my experience, so don't be too conservative when it comes to nutrients, particularly I'm talking about precision feeding with bottled nutrients, I guess you can say, right? You might do a little bit more than a half dose, generally speaking, depending on what nutrient line you're using, so on and so forth, but I've found that I've been able to give more than just a half dose. There have been times where I gave a full dose, particularly in flowering. So watch the feeding, and might be a hungry one. I'm not sure what generation the PFG is, but I assume there's going to be some variation in feedings depending on phenotype as well. The heavy feeder, in my opinion, on the two that I had. Can we hear the OG 4x4 face? That's funny. Yeah, every time I say 4 foot by 4 foot, people think I say it weird. I don't know. Does that really sound weird? It's my accent. So I'm originally from Boston, and I kind of have the accent a little bit on some words. It went away a lot, but 4 foot by 4 foot. I guess that sounds weird to some of you. Can you give any advice on autopots, do's and don'ts? Yes. So I haven't had the best luck with doing organics in autopots. And there are people out there that'll say, everything's been fine for me. For me personally, top dressing nutrients and using the autopots didn't really work out well in my expectations. If using synthetics, it'll probably be a little bit easier for you, because the autopots, it's wicking up from the bottom, right? So you're not doing any top watering. So keeping that top layer moist, where the amendments are for organics and breakdown, was difficult for me. And that's even having a mulch layer on top of it, even having a cover crop on top of it to try to help with water retention and keep that top layer moist. So I wouldn't recommend using organics with autopots, but some people do, so you might want to try it. Synthetics should be good. The copper disc, make sure you're using that. Make sure it's inside the pot. I think some people actually got away with putting it outside the pot, like kind of in the bin below or whatever. So that makes sure the roots don't grow out from the bottom and clog up your autopot. That's happened before to people. Been using RO water, but cost may become an issue. How can I remove the chlorine from tap water? It's a good question. RO, you must be going out and buying RO. Yeah, it does add up. Consider getting a one for under the sink. That's what I have. I don't know if you have the space for it or not, but I have it under my kitchen sink, and I have just basically have 1 gallon containers that I pump it into. But some people will do a 5 gallon bucket, and then they'll put it into a 5 gallon bucket. But removing chlorine from tap water, as long as it's chlorine and not chloramine, make sure it's chlorine first. Often folks just let it sit out 24 hours, 48 hours. Having sunlight on it will help speed up that process for the chlorine to dissipate. But yeah, a lot of people just let it sit out for 24 to 48 hours, and then the chlorine is removed from the tap water. Now, I recommend that you get a water report and have somebody take a look at that to see if there's any other issues. So the soil doctor, for example, is somebody who I recommend that you take your water report to. I think going through Logan Labs, you might want to actually send a water sample to Logan Labs, have them test it, get the result, then talk to the soil doctor, and he can give you some really good information about if there's any sort of contaminants in there that's going to impact your plant, or he can actually tell you what type of, what you'll need in your nutrients as far as elements, because a lot of tap waters have a lot of calcium in it. So if you're using a nutrient solution, you won't need as much calcium, as one example. But yeah, just let it sit out for 24, 48 hours. I think that's typically what people do. Do you use silica throughout the grow? I do. Yeah, it's safe to use throughout the grow. There's so many benefits for silica. Now, short answer. Yep, I use silica throughout the grow. Does Freak Show have a traditional skunky smell or something different? It's more of like at least the cultivar I have is more of like a lemony type smell. It's funny, I was moving the Freak Show from one tent to another, and I had it like all over my arms. It was flopping all over the place. The buds they're so heavy that they're flopping all over the place. And I had it all over my arms, and I'm just like smelling myself. And it's definitely more of a lemony, at least for the phenos that I have. Do you feed the whole time with autopots? I'm assuming you're talking about with synthetic nutrients. It's really hard to give you that answer. Each nutrient line is going to be different. Me personally, I've been able to do like a quarter dose of nutrients in the reservoir. And unfortunately, each cultivar seems to be different. Each phenotype is different. So you could get different results as far as like the health of the plant. If you're feeding nutrients from one reservoir going to multiple phenotypes, you could see different there. There have been times where I've shut off the valve, let the plants kind of dry out, sometimes just add in water, top feed water for 1 or 2 times, then turn that valve back on for the autopots to come on. So that's one thing you might want to consider if you feel like you are potentially over fertilizing. So something to keep in mind. Can I transplant from Roots organic soil to Fox Farm? Absolutely. I don't know if you're talking about like starting in a 1-gallon container, for example, or solo cup of Roots organic and then going into a new container that has Fox Farm in there. Absolutely no problem. What I hope you're not talking about is like starting in a 1-gallon container with Roots organic, taking that plant out, shaking off all the medium, breaking up all the roots, getting rid of that medium, then going into Fox Farm. I don't think there's any need to do that. I've seen people go from soil to cocoa that way, and the plant was not happy at all. So I wouldn't recommend that. But you can absolutely go from Roots Organic to Fox Farm or vice versa, no problem. Did you completely move on from Earth Dust nutrient line? I wouldn't say that. I still have a bunch of Earth Dust nutrients. I plan to use them in my outdoor garden. I've just been really liking the craft blend. You know, I only have so many plants, so nothing against Earth Dust. Definitely took me a while to get used to it and learn what the heck I was doing. I wish there was more instruction back when it first came out, but once I got the hang of it, yeah, things were dialed in. Just got into cocoa. Does the pH go up over time with cocoa, unlike soil? That's a good question. It's hard to say because it really depends on what else is in the cocoa. Like for amendments, for example, what are you using? Dolomite lime is one of the things that drifts it up. So if you have dolomite lime in there, it'll definitely drift up. And the plant is going to release acids in order to control the pH a little bit, right? So if your pH is too high, the plant will actually release acids into the rhizosphere. It will lower the pH, particularly to grab some of the elements that aren't available at that pH. Iron is a good example of that. 6.5 pH or lower is typically where iron can be uptaken by the plant. So if the pH is higher than that, it's going to send out acids to lower it, so it's able to grab that iron. Now, cocoa coir in particular is known for a high cation exchange. So talking about cation exchange capacity, it's basically, think of it like a buffer. A lot of people explain it as. You've got your piece of media, cocoa, and you've got all these particles that can stick to it. And so cation exchange capacity is just like the capacity it has, the ability it has to stick to those particles. You hear about how cocoa, a lot of people have to go heavy on the calcium and magnesium, right? It's because cocoa has a high cation exchange capacity. Things are going to stick to it, that calcium, magnesium. So that's why a lot of people will buffer cocoa with CalMag prior to planting in it. Rinsing and buffering, that helps most of the time. As far as does it pH go up over time? I found it does if you're checking the runoff pH, but I found it doesn't really impact the plant. I personally go for a 5.8 pH of the nutrient solution going in, and then I ignore runoff pH for cocoa. Because when I first started planting in it, what went in for pH is what measured it came out. However, over time, what went in, I got a number that was way up there. And then I read online, did my own research, and people say ignore it. Ignore it. As long as the plant's looking fine, you're putting that 5.8 pH going in, you're going to be fine. So that's kind of what I've stuck with over the years.